Welcome back to the We Who Thirst podcast, where Jesus is the living water and it is we who thirst. You can support this ministry by joining our Patreon. Our current series is Women in Context, a deep dive into the lives and stories of the women of the Bible in their cultural, familial, and historical context. Today we are continuing our mini-series on Proverbs 31 to discover how God delights in women. Specifically, we will be talking about how God delights in women who are strong, assertive, bold, and dare I say, stereotypically masculine in some of their personality presentation. With me today is my dear friend Elice Kilko. Elice is a cross-cultural teacher with a heart for ministry through loving hospitality. She was raised in Brazil and has studied in Israel. Personally, she's confronted questions about the goodness of God and deeply desires women to know Jesus' love for them. Elice, tell me what kind of personality you were taught, either implicitly or explicitly, that a godly woman needed to have.
Yeah, it's a good question. I feel like growing up, we learned so much about what a godly woman should look like. I have three older sisters, so our house was full of girls. And um, I feel like within the Christian circles we were in, we were often taught Titus 2 and Proverbs 31 and the passage from, I think, Peter, where it talks about
Mm-hmm.
a quiet spirit, a
Yep.
meek and quiet spirit. And I just felt like I didn't fit the bill. I didn't
Mm.
measure up. How could I be quiet? How could I be quiet?
Yeah.
I was not quiet, so I must not be a godly woman. And it wasn't until I started studying, thankfully, in my home, we studied um, through women of the Bible. My
Mm.
dad had this book called All the Women of the Bible by Herbert Lockyer. And while I
Okay.
disagree a lot with things now, it was definitely one of the books that made me realize that God had a lot to say about women.
Awesome.
And I would flip through and read, and I realized that a lot of women in the Bible weren't necessarily quiet, and that it wasn't a specific personality. Like, I didn't have to be quiet. I could serve Jesus with my words too. So,
Mm.
but it's definitely been a struggle throughout the years.
Yeah, definitely. I know I really struggled growing up feeling like my personality just wasn't the correct personality. I have a very type A, strong, big personality, very opinionated. Just going to tell you bluntly how it is. I'm not trying to be rude. I'm just not going to, there's no frills. I'm just going to straight down the middle tell you exactly how I think it is. And that was just not, people usually weren't overtly condemning of it, but you just got the vibe that it's like, you're just not the right fit.
A regular fit. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
that makes so much sense. And when we met, that our strong personalities definitely had to get along. We had to work to make that happen. So,
But I think it was also our strong personalities that we were like, we are going to be friends. Come
yes.
hell or high water,
We're going to make this work.
we will make this work. And we decided, and that was
Yep.
that. Like, we had
It's true.
bumps, but here we are.
This many years later,
Yeah,
since
a lot of years
2007.
later. I don't want to do the math, but yeah. So, yeah, that whole cultural vibe that women are supposed to have, and you expect women in the Bible to have, and it's taught that they have these gentle, quiet spirits. And if you see someone not being, they're like, well, they were still gentle and quiet because the Bible says you have to be. So, and it kind of created for me, at least a little bit, this cognitive dissonance because you have like Deborah and Jael,
And
and then
Abigail, women
Abigail.
who fought.
And Abigail and some of them, I don't want to get sidetracked too much, but there was also like Deborah, Abigail were also like the circles I was in couldn't fully decide if they were like positive or not quite positive female examples from the Old
Yes.
Testament because they
If
were
it was
too
something you
strong.
should, if
Yeah,
you should follow their example or not.
right.
That's true.
You know, it's kind of like, I don't know about them. But the Proverbs 31 woman, you definitely should be like the Proverbs 31 woman. Like
Yes.
that was drilled in. Proverbs 31, Titus 2, that is what you need to live up to. And these women are homemaking nurturers. They're super feminine, and that's what you need to be. Exactly like them.
Yes. which made it so hard
Yeah.
to live up to that.
Yeah.
What did you find other people saying as you studied Proverbs 31?
Um, I looked at a few things. Abigail Dodds, in her article, The Beauty of Womanhood, Her Uniqueness Makes Her Essential on the Desiring God website, she said that when we as women forsake our feminine glory in pursuit of the uniqueness that belongs to men, we abandon our God-given glory. We become usurpers, persistently insisting that our uterus and biology are equal to nothing, irrelevant. Women believe the lie that in order to be relevant in a man's world, you must become like a man, when the opposite is true. So I found these people talking about how women need to be uniquely feminine. It is God's design that you have to be uniquely feminine in a very feminine way, like no confusion, no masculine traits. You have to be feminine. Trillia Newbell, in her chapter in Design for Joy, her chapter is The Feminine Focus, she says, it's not merely physical attributes that make us male and female. Femininity goes much deeper than what we see in the mirror. God created us with roles and instincts that are distinctly feminine. And I remember growing up hearing vestiges of this, like you have to be distinctly feminine. Of course, nobody ever fully defined what that meant. It was, for me, I like things a little more concrete. And it was kind of this nebulous concept. And I'm trying to figure out social skills. And I'm just like, what do I want?
And
What,
how does
like
that
pearls?
trickle down to personality?
Yeah, like I wear pearls. I curl my hair, wear skirts. Um, but when I step in a room, I kind of take charge. And everybody's okay with that. But that's not okay and it's not feminine. And I don't know what I'm doing here. Okay. And then they would add the nurturing word on top of it. Women are feminine and nurturing. I'm like, okay, nurturing? What's that? Is that like taking care of babies and toddlers? Because count me out. Not interested in babies and toddlers. Is that soul care of small people? Okay, I might be able to do that for older elementary. I'm finding as my kids get older, I'm like, okay, soul care of small humans that can actually have a conversation. I can do that, but is that nurturing or is that just shepherding? And now we're getting funny on our terms. And I felt like these words, you had to be distinctly feminine, but nobody could actually define what that meant.
Pinpoint.
Or when they did, I didn't fit the bill because it
Sure.
ended up like a soft, gentle personality. Yeah, that's not
Which
me.
is not you.
Not ever. So
Yeah.
it was just a very, very confusing. Did you run into any of that? Like you have to be overtly feminine teaching?
Yeah. I was always growing up, I was always closer to my dad than my mom, and
Ditto.
I was never into sports or anything. And I loved, cooking and
Hmm.
a lot of things that are now very like homemaking sort of things. I care very deeply about my friends, which you could say is nurturing, but I always felt like I was too loud for, I was too, by loud, I don't mean necessarily volume, but too outspoken,
Yes, yes.
um, and too direct.
Yep.
And I
You're not
held too
supposed to
much
be
eye
direct.
contact with the opposite sex for some people. And I was just trying to get my point across.
Yep.
Um,
Make sure they
and
understand what you're saying.
yes, yes. People accuse me often of being cold, but I
Mm,
didn't mean to.
I got that too. Yep.
Um, People told me that I had spikes on my shoulder, like a cold shoulder, and there were spikes on that cold shoulder. So yeah, I heard a lot of that, and I didn't know how that fit because I wanted to love God and I
Hmm.
wanted to show God's love to my friends and to the people who were around me. And I loved, like I loved working in the nursery growing up. So, I loved babies. But I just, in so many ways, I didn't fit the exact,
Yeah.
I always wanted to be unique in my style, which means I hated pink and I didn't want to wear lace or frills. So I definitely struggled through a lot of that through my teenage years. I wore t-shirts and cargo shorts and, just like was very tomboyish
Yeah.
in my appearance. And I didn't know how that fit with a gentle and quiet spirit, or, how am I supposed to um, fulfill this femininity that I don't feel connected to in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So I really struggled with that, especially through my teen years.
Yeah. No, I felt like I struggled with a huge amount of personality. Women talk about how they have like body image issues because they don't match up to like
Society's
Cosmopolitan or
standard.
Vogue's ideal. I always felt like I had personality image issues. Like I was constantly trying to like mask or make myself smaller. And it never really worked. And even when I could do that, it wasn't good for my soul.
For
And
sure.
as I'm hearing us both talk about this, knowing what I know now about neurodivergence, I wonder how much of our experience is having ADHD, having some neurodivergence, and that being a piece as well, where some of the quote stereotypical femininity pieces are much more neurotypical,
Neurotypical.
perhaps. I'm just
Yeah, it's
throwing that
possible.
out there because I know a lot of our listeners are neurodivergent as well. And
Yeah.
that makes identity really challenging as you are trying to go through it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And even with issues of never feeling like you fit in and all of that. So
Yeah. Like you just can't
it's
figure
really
out how to
hard.
be the right kind of girl.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Proverbs 31, I avoided forever because I was just sure it was going to be another you don't match up, you're not good enough kind of passage. And I did not need any more of that in my life after Bible college and seminary and all the voices being like, you have to be overtly feminine. And I just wasn't.
Yes. Which is so hard.
Yeah.
So where do you see in Proverbs 31 that speaks to this difficulty that we both have and that we grew up with and struggled with all through our teen years?
Proverbs 31, as I studied it in the Hebrew, completely shocked me. I was not expecting anything that I found in this passage. Especially related to like her personality. Because when you look at the Proverbs 31 woman, the language they use to describe her, and we miss it in the English. So if you want to see more of the Hebrew nuances of the text brought out, go to my website, wewhothirst.com. You can download a free copy of my translation of Proverbs 31 from the Hebrew. In the English, you miss a lot of it, but the Hebrew is overtly masculine in its description of the Proverbs 31 woman, which completely shocked me.
Which is incredible. So you're saying that the words that they use in Hebrew are words that people in that time would associate with masculine traits.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. Yeah. And so we can go through some of those verses, but for me, it was completely freeing because it's like the woman everybody is supposed to be like. The Hebrew Bible describes in masculine traits. She was absolutely a woman, but she was not anything like our stereotypical perception of a super feminine, nurturing woman.
So she was a strong woman, or
She was. Yes, and we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. One thing I want to start with is talking just about how we translate um, who she is, because they don't call her the Proverbs 31 woman in the
no.
text. You will have a lot of different translations. If you look at verse 10, there's a lot of different translations, like excellent wife, um, a woman of noble character, different things like that. I mean, books have even been written, like I had Martha Peace's The
Yes.
Excellent Wife on my
Yeah,
shelf
she
my
wrote that.
entire teenage college years as I was aspiring to be this type of woman. But when you look at the Hebrew, Verse 10 says, a woman of valor who will attain. Far above pearls is her price. Verse 29 uses that same word for valor. It says, numerous daughters do valiantly, and you yourself rise above all of them.
So valiant is like another word for like courageous almost, or like
Mm-hmm.
virtuous, or
Yeah. Yeah.
like a battle word.
It's a battle word. Exactly. The Hebrew word for valor is chayil, and it is typically, our English translations typically translate that word as noble character, excellent, worthy, or virtuous. And those translations are not wrong because there is a depth of meaning to the Hebrew word chayil, but they miss, as you just said, the battle component of what that word is describing.
Yeah, like we talk about soldiers who receive the Medal of Valor. If we could
Mm-hmm.
reframe and talk about a woman of valor, we have that connotation.
Yeah. And what's really unique is outside of the book of Proverbs, the only time valor or chayil is used of a woman is in Ruth. Every other time, so the word chayil occurs 242 times in the Hebrew Bible, in 242 verses, I should say.
Wow.
In 238 of those verses, it's talking about men. I believe 4, maybe 6 times total does it refer to a woman. Most of them occur in the book of Proverbs, once or twice in the book of Ruth. So, overarchingly, chayil is a word to describe men. It is a masculine in tenor 90 something percent of the time. It's not a word commonly used for women ever in the Bible.
It's incredible and really cool.
It is. And the most of the time that valor is used, it's a military term. So it occurs in 242 verses, but 172 of those usages, so about half, it's in a military context. And I've gone through and I've looked at them all. It's a
Hmm.
military context. It can also be used to denote wealth, skill to do a task, general strength, or power influence. And those other meanings are often what people use to try to translate it when it refers to a woman, because there's no military context in Proverbs 31,
Sure.
and the word is overtly military in its Hebrew usage. So they try to find something else to translate it rather than simply calling her the woman of valor. They say she's the excellent wife, a woman of wealth who can find. But I find they're not wanting to call out what the Hebrew is actually doing there.
Which is a shame for all of the people like us who never felt like they fit in.
It really is. Like if somebody had told me as a teenager that the Proverbs 31 was a woman of valor, which is a military, strong, ferocious term, I would have been like, what? Like the Bible's literally describing me?
Yeah.
That would have done so much for my soul. How does the idea of valor as a military term in describing the Proverbs 31 woman, what does that do? How does that change the feel of the passage for you?
Well, I think it definitely, like last podcast, we talked about how it's not a checklist, how Proverbs 31 isn't a checklist. And I think that when you also talk about how the Proverbs 31 woman is a woman of valor, that gives you room to be courageous and to explore the areas of your personality that you want or need to be more assertive in, and show that you can be this woman that God created you to be in your full personality.
Mhm.
Your full personality. God made it, and you can take it to God, and he loves that. So
I
it
love that.
really hits different.
Yeah. And I love how you brought out it allows you to be the assertive that you need to be. Because a lot of the cultures I was in really was down on women being assertive. And I think that's part of the reason we have had some of the like sexual abuse scandals in the SBC and various things, because women are taught to not be assertive. They're taught to not trust themselves. So they're not able to recognize when abuse is happening. And then even when they don't want to speak up because they'd have to be assertive, and assertiveness is considered divisive. And it's just this whole head game that women start playing, like, should I even open my mouth? And we'll bring these themes back up in later podcast episodes. But that empowerment of women to stand up in godly ways. We're not talking about
Sure.
sinful expressions here, but to stand up assertively and say, this is right.
This is
This is wrong.
wrong.
I will go to battle for what is right. And God smiles on that in a woman.
Yes.
That's a complete paradigm shift from the nebulous, has to be overtly feminine, and definitely nurturing womanhood I was raised in. Like warrior woman versus nurturing. They were going to say nurturing every time, and the warrior woman needs to go turn her plow into baby bottles. Her sword needs to
Yeah.
become a crib. Like, you hang it up and you go take care of a baby. And that's not the picture we actually see in Proverbs 31.
Yeah. Yeah. It wasn't for nothing that JL used a tent peg to kill the Sisera. She used her women tools to do
Yes.
a job that needed to be done, and she
Yes.
was definitely a woman of valor.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's move on to verse 11, because I mean, we're looking thematically through Proverbs 31. So we're just going to hit some high points of these verses, because this warlike theme continues throughout the entire chapter. It's not just the beginning and the end, verses 10 and 29. Let's look at verse 11. Can you read that for me
Yeah.
out of the ESV?
Yes. It says, the heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain.
Of gain. All right. And then did you have another translation up as well?
I did. CSB also, it says, the heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will not lack anything good.
Anything good. So the phrase he will not lack gain, or he will not lack anything good in the ESV and CSB, those words are the Hebrew word shalal that I would translate in this way. And spoil her husband will not be without. So not spoil like food that spoils and goes bad, but spoil like pirate booty or bounty won in war. This word is overtly warlike. It's not just like, oh, your husband will have everything good that he needs. It's like, no, her husband's heart trusts in her, and he will not be without the winnings from her battle, is
That's incredible.
basically what it's saying. And you get like shivers because you have this idea of her coming home, hanging up her sword, and providing him with plunder. Like that could be another word. Trusts in her does the heart of her husband, and plunder he will not be without. This woman is conquering. Now, not literally battle conquering. That's not the context, but that's the imagery they're using. And again, it's incredibly masculine imagery.
So she's bringing provisions for her family through the hard work that she does in a battle-like way, even though it's not an actual war.
Right. Yes, exactly. Yeah, this word's very specific, and it plays off the masculine warlike imagery from chayil in verse 10, valor in verse 10. So the
Yes.
two verses are playing together. And the author of Proverbs 31 does not view this woman's tasks as easy, or even women's work, as the colloquialism
Mhm.
goes.
Yeah.
Instead, the author compares the results of the woman of valor's labor to bounty brought back by men from battle. He values her labor that highly. Which in a lot of Christian circles, I hear them talking about how much they value women's labor. Being a mom is the most important job in the world, and they say all this. and then the men don't want any part of it.
Yeah.
Not all men. I'll be the first to say that, because like my father and my husband, they are there. They're getting their hands dirty. They're changing the diapers. They're taking care of the kids. My husband and my dad, in many ways, are far more nurturing than I am. If my kids are sick, my husband's like, oh, come here. I'll cuddle you. I'm like, I will take your temperature. I will run to the store and I will get you medicine. I can cuddle you for 5 minutes. And then mommy has to move because sitting still for more than 5 minutes to cuddle you is literal torture. My husband's like, I got 2 hours. We'll just lay on the couch and I'll provide you warmth and comfort. Like, I'm glad they have those nurturing tendencies, because I will bring back bounty from the grocery store in the form of medicine, and I will lay it at your feet.
Yes, and that's important too.
So I appreciate men who step in to do those things, but in our culture, in the church, men talk about being a mom is the highest calling, but I don't want to do any of those things. But here
Yeah.
in Proverbs 31, her work is elevated to the same reverence as the warrior that their culture depended on for safety.
Mhm. Are there other words like that in this passage?
The next one I think is probably one of my favorite. Can you read verse 15 in the ESV?
She rises while it is yet night and provides food for her household and portions for her maiden.
So that word food for her household is not one of the typical Hebrew words for food. This is the word prey. I can't remember which translation it was, but they translated it meat, which would be more accurate than just general food. But it's the idea of prey, like a prey animal. It's the imagery here. We, in verses 10 and 11, we had the imagery of a warrior going to battle, bringing back plunder for her family. Where this is a praise song for a warrior who brings back plunder. In verse 15, the imagery shifts. Now the imagery is of a lioness standing over her kill. She's just killed a gazelle, and she's providing food off of the gazelle to her cubs. So it's still that warlike imagery. It's just a slightly different picture. And I love that the proverb keeps coming back to that. It's not just food. Woman, get in the kitchen and make me a sandwich.
Yeah.
I'm going to go hunt a deer. No, she's the one out there hunting the deer. She's the one bringing the prey back in.
Which should be encouraging to all of the women in your space who hunt
Yes.
come fall,
Yes.
which is exciting.
They could all say, hey, I'm just being a Proverbs 31 woman. I'm doing exactly what the Bible says. They now have a verse for that, their theme
So
verse for the hunt. One commentator said, the use of prey rather than bread or food gives verse 15 the overtones of aggression and pugnacity.
Pugnacity is such a great word.
It is. And especially when you are raised in a culture where women should not be aggressive or pugnacious. They need to be quiet and subdued, mild-mannered, demure.
Yes.
To have the passage be like, no, for a woman to be appropriately aggressive, and even I'm showing my own culture, because for a man to be aggressive, you don't have to hedge that.
Yeah.
But as a woman, I feel like I have to hedge saying a woman's going to be, she's appropriately aggressive. But I wouldn't ever say a man has to be appropriately aggressive.
Yeah.
So I'm finding myself even hedging that kind of statement. But to have that we can be what we are called to be situationally. She's not always bringing home prey. It's as the need requires.
Yes.
But we can step up in those ways is so freeing for my soul.
Yeah. So here then we see that she's a force to be reckoned with. She's this woman of valor is truly not passive or limiting herself. She's being her full potential. She's meeting her full potential.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
So are there other verses? Tell
Oh,
me
you know
more.
there are. So verse 17, I'm just going to read my translation of it. Verse 17 says, she girds her loins with strength and makes her arms mighty. What on earth does it mean to gird one's loins? That is not the way we ever talk.
Well, I know from growing up that it was like when they would tie um their clothes up so that they could do labor or
Mhm.
battle, so
Yep.
that they could have freedom of movement.
Yeah. One way I've seen it done is like you stand and you bring, because even the men wore long robes, you'd bring the robe up between your legs and tuck it in the belt in front, or you could like kind of tie it on the sides.
Yes, yeah,
But
that's what I've seen
again,
too.
this is another phrase that is overtly masculine in its description. Women are not described anywhere in the Old Testament as girding their loins. Nowhere. Nowhere. Women do not gird their loins in the Old Testament. Only men gird their loins. And here the Proverbs 31 woman is doing a stereotypically male endeavor again. So as I think about those initial quotes I read from complementarian thinkers like Abigail Dodds and Trillia Newbell, where they're like, women have to be overtly feminine, they can't be masculine in any way. Then you read the Hebrew of Proverbs 31 and you go, wait a minute.
There's a total disconnect in what the Hebrew is saying and how complementarians often see it in this day and age.
Yes. And even complementarian articles on Proverbs 31, they'll be like women should be strong in that they should be confident in God's goodness and they should work hard in their homes. And that's about as far as they take it. They don't get into, wait a minute, because they'll on one side you have to be overtly feminine, like they are stuck to that idea.
Yeah.
But Proverbs 31 is not at
Mhm.
all. We see in Proverbs 31 this perception of gender roles that the Proverbs 31 is not staying within. We see her working vigorously in areas of the masculine domain in her culture without losing her femininity or her God-honoring status as a woman. God likes what this woman is doing, or we wouldn't have the inspired scripture in our Bible.
Yeah.
When I started looking at Proverbs 31 as a cultural representation of characteristics that God likes in women, it completely changed my perspective.
I can totally see that. I can see how it would change that for sure.
Because she doesn't go about her tasks diminutively or quietly. She walks in with great confidence and exercises her authority and power in her community and family in strong, assertive ways.
Yeah.
And if you're interested, I'm not going to get into it today, but if you're interested in the role of women in the Old Testament family and what that looked like, I have a talk on patricentrism and heterarchy up on my YouTube channel. You can find that. Search for We Who Thirst podcasts, and you'll be able to find that lecture there. And I'll walk through all of the different ways that women had authority and power in their community and families in the Old Testament. Just a side note, if you're interested in that topic, if something was like, oh, I want to know more about that, I have a lecture out there for you.
And it has pictures. It's so good.
Yes, it does have pictures, which pictures are always great. That's why it's on YouTube, because yeah, it's really great that way.
So, what ways have you found Christian culture appreciates women's strength, and in what ways did you see that they reject? We talked a little bit about that, but what ways do you see that are, yeah, in this day and age we reject that, and what ways do you see that we get that from what the Bible is saying?
The complementarians I've read and listened to, and just kind of the complementary culture I swam in. I'm definitely not going to blame my parents because I think they parented me pretty well. Like they did a good job with the daughter God gave them. So none of this is
Same.
blame like on my parents, but we were still in this cultural river that impacted me deeply, even though it didn't come from my parents specifically. They provided specific books like Martha Peace's The Excellent Wife, but it was really the cultural river, the college I went to, the seminary I went to. So the complementarians I've read and listened to, they say they want women to be strong. They really do. If you go search any of their websites for Proverbs 31, they're going to say women should be strong. They need to be disciplined. They need to be enduring. Like, what comes to your mind? How do they describe a woman's strength?
Yeah, I think it's definitely in like stereotypical feminine ways. So like, oh, you should be strong in that you're, working in the garden, that you have a garden, or that you know,
Hoist
are
two babies on your hips and
hoist,
take them to the
yeah,
grocery store.
whatever. But there isn't a whole lot of space often, or there wasn't as I was growing up for women who have, really strong thighs because they love to play soccer, or,
Right.
you know, um, just different things like that, where their strength could be celebrated in the strength that God gave them for, a woman that likes to do CrossFit or something like that, which is not
Exactly.
me. But just that wasn't celebrated,
No.
like here I was feeling outcast for my personality, but I felt very comfortable with other girls who were struggling because they were super tomboys that loved playing soccer,
Yeah.
or were super sporty and they had really athletic bodies,
Yeah.
girls that were swimmers and had these awesome shoulders, just
Yeah.
because that's what their sport needed. So I feel like it was it devalued the way that our culture talked about femininity, devalued the strength that God gave women in like physical or personality ways, because they expected, women to be this one monolith of
Hmm.
a gentle and quiet spirit, which to them meant a soft voice and just like a very um vanilla sort of personality, which I don't even like to say because I love vanilla, and vanilla from different places in the world. Like there's so much variance, but as
Yeah.
people understand
Yeah.
it.
And there was even not just like the subtle cultural undertones, but even like John Piper in one of his, I think it's the
Ask Pastor
Recovering
John.
Biblical Manhood and Womanhood, even talks about how women shouldn't necessarily be in the gym lifting weights and trying to be manly by having muscles. It's like she makes strong her arms.
How does she do that? I mean, she's probably grinding wheat and things like that. That's a workout.
It is.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, just that's a bunch of baloney, as my dad would say.
Yeah, but they wanted women to be strong, but it had to be in an overtly feminine way. So not muscles, not personality. Pushing out a baby is a nice overtly feminine strength.
Strong.
Strong. But it couldn't be masculine um, at all. But Proverbs 31 teaches us that the woman of valor's splendor, her glory, is intrinsically tied to God, and he adores her strength. Proverbs 31 is God saying, I love a strong, even a woman who transgresses some of these gender boundaries a little bit, where she is a woman after his own heart, but she's a little masculine. And God's like, I like that. I made her like that. That's
It
beautiful.
allows it allows for such a full spectrum of what being a woman looks like. You
Absolutely.
can be the lace and flower, feminine, quiet woman
Beautiful. Yeah,
and
be it.
honor the Lord, and you
Yes.
can be the warrior princess who goes after what she believes God wants her to do and is also a Proverbs 31 woman, a woman of valor.
Yeah. God likes women of all types. I feel like that is part of the fullness that Proverbs 31 helps us to see. because you have to read 1 Peter 3, the gentle, quiet spirit, alongside the ferocious warrior who provides prey and plunder for her family. They're not mutually exclusive, and God delights in both.
Yeah. That's
And I
so
really
good.
want to speak, especially for a moment, to those listening who might, like, we've talked a lot about the women with the strong personalities and the warrior-esque-ness, but I want to talk briefly to the women who are like, but I am the nurturing, quiet, demure woman. And I just want to say to that listener, that's beautiful. I don't want anyone to walk away from this thinking that that kind of woman is worse or not as good, or that it's God doesn't delight in that because Proverbs 31 uses the masculine language. The fact that it uses the masculine warlike imagery in Proverbs 31 is not saying a quiet, gentle, demure, more soft-spoken, careful thinking, not assertive woman is a wrong way to be a woman. That's not at all, because there's other passages that bring out the beauty of that, and God delights in that as well. I want us all to be able to think about a well-rounded womanhood where women are allowed to be whole people. We're not caricatures of an ideal. We are whole people, and that's going to look different for every woman. And that's good. We are all being transformed in our character to exemplify the fruit of the Spirit and a 1 Corinthians 13 love, but we do that in a myriad of beautiful personality types, body types, expressions that God delights in.
That gives us so much encouragement as we go forward to be whoever God made us to be. Regardless of our personality, we can be sure that if we're seeking to please the Lord and follow his example, that we're going to be pleasing to him, which is so different than the vibe we usually get when we study Proverbs 31.
Yeah. Like, I avoided Proverbs 31, and then I felt like when I noticed all these things, it was literally a love letter from God. And I'm like, not the one to say it's a love letter for the Bible scriptures or love letter written to you, because the Bible's not written to us. But in that devotional moment, I felt like the Lord was saying, for the first time, Jessica, it's okay. Exactly who I made you to be is okay. Not only is it okay, I think it's awesome. And that has been incredibly transformative in my mind and heart. And I really hope for someone listening out there who needs that same message, that this will bring them hope, that God didn't mess up and make you a girl when he should have made you a boy because you have the wrong personality to be the quote Christian girl. God made you exactly the way he wanted you, with a mixture of traits. And that is okay to have as a woman, and God delights in that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you all so much for listening. Next episode, we are going to talk about the Proverbs 31 woman and her husband and play out that relationship a little bit, emphasizing trust and how God wants women to be trusted. I can't wait to talk to you about that. We will see you next time. Thank you for listening to the We Who Thirst podcast. A complete bibliography of the research behind this episode is available at wewhothirst.com. If you would like the full show notes, an opportunity to discuss each episode in a safe Discord chat, or simply to support this ministry, visit our Patreon. I am so thankful and am honored to have had you here with me for this episode. Until next time, remember, Jesus is the living water, and it is we who thirst.